Hello, hello. Hello, hello. Hello, hello. Hello, hello. Hello, hello again. Hello, hello. And Merry Christmas. Hello, hello. Tony here, back on my channel once more with another deck profile. This week's deck profile will have us turning back the flow of time because this week's deck profile will have us join the hive mind. This week's deck profile comes straight out of the golden sands of the Albaz saga, and this week we're going to be focusing on an archetype that is one of my personal favorites, and that deck is Dragunity. Springans, Mechlords, Fenonites, Adignistern, Ancient Warriors, Drytrons, the Bee Troopers. Anyway, I've droned on enough. Without a further ado, let's get into the deck profile. 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 Hello everybody, it's Tony. Not on Aladdin's channel, but on my channel. Why, you may ask? Because unfortunately Aladdin is gone. She made this channel for me, and I haven't uploaded anything in about 3 months. So, yeah, let's do something. Whew, can you believe it's been an entire year since that video? When I started this channel, I did so under the belief that I would only maintain it for a few months as a side project. But here I am, 38 deck profiles later and a year older, back on my channel once more with another deck profile. And keeping up with our scheduled content, this week's deck profile will have us revisit the Albaz saga for another time, as we explore this story's penultimate villain in the Despia. So, who are the Despia? Well, the Despia serve as the final villains of the first arc of the Albaz saga. Having been hinted as early as Return of the Duelist, we always knew that there was something more sinister to Dogmatika Maximus and the Dogmatika Nation, especially in relation to the rift it resides under and with Fallen of Albaz who came from said rift. Throughout the sets, we got to see a slow corruption occur, starting with the questionable actions of Dogmatika Ashiyan to the monstrosity that was the White Knight of Dogmatika, ultimately culminating with Maximus's attempt to interact with the rift in Dogmatika Calamity. The Despia are a result of that interaction. In fact, a fair chunk of the Despia monsters are actually corrupted forms of prior Dogmatika monsters, and etymologically, they reference themes of stage performance, a clear reference to their role as the dramatic climax of the story. Playstyle-wise though, the Despia are a fusion-focused archetype, with a majority of their main deck monsters possessing some effect designed to benefit their use as fusion materials for a fusion summon. Now, as a result of that, the Despia definitely has potential to be splashed with other fusion-focused archetypes to bolster their strategies. But here on my channel, I like to develop decks that stay true to the archetype's intended purpose. Going as far back as to my second video on Dogmatika, I've always tried to push the limits of what the archetype can do on its own, instead of as an injectable engine, and today will be no different. And, as it turns out, the Despia actually do have a pretty cool game plan, one that acts pretty unique relative to other fusion archetypes. See, while most fusion archetypes like Shaddolls or Invoked play with a progressive playstyle in mind, constantly aiming to make the next fusion after the last, the Despia instead focus on a more recursive playstyle, aiming to constantly revive their fusions and create a loop of floatable bodies to outgrind their opponent. Combining this recursion with their card characteristics as Dark Fairies, the Despia have access to a pretty powerful pool of fusion options designed to help them establish incredibly stable boards capable of staving off even the most aggressive offenses. And those are some of the things I hope to be able to showcase as I get through the deck profile. Anyway, I've droned on enough. Without a further ado, let's get into the deck profile. Getting right into it, we begin with the only starter in the deck in our 3 Alibur, the Jester of Despia. Alibur is a level 4 Dark Fairy with 2 effects, of which you can only activate one of them per turn. When normal or special summoned, Alibur can add 1 branded spell or trap from the deck to your hand. Furthermore, while in the graveyard, should one of your fusion monsters be destroyed by battle, or leave the field by an opponent's card effect, Alibur can target one of your opponent's monsters, special summon itself back to the field from the graveyard, and then negate that targeted monster's effects for the turn. So it may come off as a little odd that Alibur would search for branded cards instead of Despia cards,
But fortunately for us, all the relevant Despia support cards are also branded cards, including our in-archetype fusion field spell and our emergency teleport, which means that Albaz acts as a way to access pretty much all of our available plays. Additionally, thanks to prior branded support released in Lightning Overdrive, Albaz also has the option to add off-brand support as well in cards like our Screams of the Branded and our Branded in White, giving us additional options to work with beyond simply Despia plays when the situation allows. Now, while you'll commonly be utilizing Albaz for just its search effect, it's important not to forget its second effect has a powerful impact as well. While the effect negation aspect can be useful at times, the real benefit of Albaz's second effect is the body he commits to the field in place of one of your fusions. Triggering off of almost any form of removal that your opponent can attempt on a fusion monster you control, Albaz, at worst, replaces said fusion with himself to maintain field presence and advantage, potentially setting you up for a follow-up fusion summon. But combined with one of the cards that he searches, Albaz then becomes the means to facilitate a chain of floatable bodies, ultimately allowing you to bring back the same fusion your opponent just removed to easily stabilize your board against a variety of threats. Moving past our starter, we then go on to Despia's main aggressor in our 3 Dramaturge of Despia. Now, to provide some etymological context, a dramaturge is described in theater as an occupation dedicated to providing a workbook for the cast, often assisting the director in providing context and coherence of the plot to the actors for the play they are to perform. Which is fitting given that Dramaturge of Despia is a corrupted Dogmatika Maximus, a central character whose actions provide context for the motivation of many characters in the Albaz saga, being effectively an in-universe dramaturge for this epic play that we currently bear witness to. But digressing from this random scholarly moment, Dramaturge of Despia is a level 8 Dark Fairy with a relevant 3000 attack points. While on the field, should a fusion, synchro, exceed, or link monster be special summoned, Dramaturge can target a monster on the field and negate its effects until the end of the turn. Furthermore, while on the field or in the hand, should Dramaturge of Despia be used as a fusion material and be sent to the graveyard or banished, Dramaturge of Despia can summon itself right back to the field. Coming in at an impressive 3000 attack points and rocking a pretty relevant negation effect, Dramaturge of Despia acts as your most accessible form of aggression and disruption beyond your fusions. Despite it being a level 8 monster, the means of putting Dramaturge onto the field are incredibly easy to achieve, as fusing with it in any way essentially allows you to drop him for free on top of whatever fusion monster you are also committing to the field. This allows you to achieve sudden bursts of aggression with very little complexity while still maintaining a stable board for your opponent's turn. Finally, it's also important to note that Dramaturge's negation effect triggers whenever any fusion, exceed, synchro, or link monster is special summoned, and can target any monster of your choice, not just the one that was summoned. Meaning that on top of being a responsive negation to an extra deck summon, you can also make proactive use of this effect whenever you fusion summon or revive one of your fusion monsters, turning off established boards to then go in for a push. Having established our 2 main actors for Despia, we move on to their supporting cast, starting with our 3 Tragedy of Despia. Tragedy is a level 1 Dark Fairy with 2 effects. When sent to the graveyard or banished by a card effect, Tragedy can search for a Despia monster from your deck. Furthermore, while in the graveyard, Tragedy can banish itself to target any branded spell or trap in your graveyard and set it to your field. Unlike Albaz or Dramaturge, it's very unlikely you'll ever be summoning Tragedy to your field, given his abysmal stats and lack of an on-field effect. But what it lacks in field impact, it makes up for in every other way. First off, like Dramaturge, Tragedy has an effect that can trigger when used as a fusion material for a fusion summon, allow you to search into another Despia monster since it was sent to the graveyard by a card effect by the fusion. However, unlike Dramaturge, Tragedy is not limited to only triggering off of being used as a fusion material, instead being able to trigger its search as long as it was sent to the graveyard or banished by a card effect. This means that, on top of fusion summoning, you have a number of other useful outlets that can trigger its effect, many of which can do so from your deck to help you grab into a Despia like Albaz to start your plays. Second off, once in the graveyard, Tragedy acts as a means of resetting your used branded spell and traps. As I had mentioned previously, Despia comes packing with a fusion's field spell and an emergency teleport, both powerful effects that often deserve to be used more than once. Tragedy, by its second effect, provides you that opportunity, banishing itself to reset them onto the field to be used again. Finally, wrapping up our Despia lineup, we have the 1 Comedy of Despia. Comedy, like Tragedy, is a level 1 Dark Fairy. While in the hand, Comedy can discard itself in response to the targeting of a Despia card to negate the effect, and once in the grave, Comedy can summon itself back onto the field as a quick effect by attributing 1 fusion monster you control. So unlike Tragedy, Comedy acts more as a means of protection than consistency. While you will rarely ever have to worry about protecting your Despia monsters from targeting removal, you do at times have to worry about them trying to negate an Aliber or trying to remove your fusion field spell. Comedy in turn denies those attempts, allowing both to go through to proceed with your plays. More importantly though is Comedy's second effect. While it may seem counterproductive to give up one of your fusion boss monsters for a level 1 body, the reason you would ever use this effect is for the same reasons you would use Aliber's second effect, to replace one of your fusions with a different body. This can be used to blink fusions to dodge effects, but in most cases it's intended to work with your fusion field spell to facilitate a similar chain of floatable bodies for stable board development. With all the Despia monsters now covered, we move on to the off-theme support, starting with the 1 Albion the Shrouded Dragon and the 1 Fallen of Albaz. So to explain what each does, Fallen of Albaz, when normal or special summoned, can discard a card to perform a fusion summon using itself and monsters your opponent controls, essentially acting as a weaker super poly for the deck. The reason why we play him is because one of our Despia fusions has the option of floating into him from the deck, allowing us to bring him out on the opponent's turn to fuse away our opponent's monsters. Additionally, his inclusion in the deck does open us up to playing some of the related support for Fallen of Albaz, potentially giving us more options, but in most cases he will be our target for our Albion the Shrouded Dragon. Albion, while in the hand or graveyard, can send a Fallen of Albaz or Fallen of Albaz related card from the hand or deck to the graveyard to do one of 2 things depending on where the card was sent. If the card was sent from the hand, Albion can summon itself onto the field from wherever it activated. If it was sent from the deck, however, Albion puts itself to the bottom of the deck, and if it put itself there from your hand, allows you to draw a card. Now rarely will you ever be sending a card from your hand for Albion's effect, so don't expect much in the ways of generating field presence with him. In most cases, you'll be using Albion as a way to dump Albaz directly from your deck to the graveyard for use with his related support. And should you do this by activating his effect in hand, you essentially get a free dump and a cycle to boot. Finally, it's also important to note that Albion has an additional effect that treats himself as Albaz while in the graveyard, meaning that you can also choose to send an Albaz related spell or trap card while Albion is in the graveyard to have it reset itself through its own effect. This at least makes Albion somewhat worthwhile to fuse with and a neat pseudo searcher at times for some of your more niche support options. Continuing from there, we then have our 2 Edge Imp chain. So in previous deck profiles, mostly on Spanko's channel, you may have seen me include this card as a means of grabbing into a Pfeiffer Patchwork as a way to grab then into another chain and a polymerization. And in this deck, the purpose has not changed. Since Chain can trigger the search into a Pfeiffer spell as long as it was sent from the hand or field to the graveyard, he synergizes fantastically with our fusion plays and our discard outlets as a way to grab into a poly and another body. The extra body in turn allows us material for another fusion summon, while the poly itself provides us the opportunity to make multiple fusion summons in one turn, which while not commonly a thing for Despia, can help us get into some of our stronger boss monsters in one turn. Then, wrapping up our monsters, we have our hand traps in our 3 Effect Veiler. Veiler is mostly here as effect negation, but it also has additional synergy by way of being a light monster. Some of our Despia and Albaz fusions require light monsters as materials, and while we can achieve this through fusing a fusion monster, it's equally nice to be able to do so using a dead Veiler to skip a few steps. Going into the spells, we start with the most important spell in the Despia deck in our 3 Despia Theater of the Branded. Theater is a field spell which, like most Despia cards, possess 2 on-field effects. Firstly, during the main phase, Theater can fusion summon a level 8 or higher fusion monster using monsters from your hand or field as fusion material. Secondly, but more importantly, when a non-fusion fairy monster will be destroyed by battle or leave the field by an opponent's card effect, Theater can target one level 8 or higher fusion monster in the graveyard and special summon it to your field. Possessing two crucial effects, Despia, Theater of the Branded, sets the stage for the entirety of the Despia archetype. Its first effect is essentially a more exclusive version of polymerization, being only able to summon level 8 or higher fusions instead of any fusion. But the fact that it could do this every turn provides the deck a continuous means of fusion summoning, thus removing a need to play cards to continuously find us a fusion spell. More notable, however, is Theater's second effect, which defines the entire playstyle of the Despia deck. Triggering practically off of any removal of a non-fusion fairy type monster, which all our Despia are, Theater provides a constant stream of recursion for our fusion monsters, allowing us to essentially replace any of our basic Despias with a boss monster on their removal by battle or card effect. And it's through this effect we can also see why the second effects of Aluber and Comedy are so important for this deck in creating stable recurable boards. To demonstrate, let's say our field currently controls a level 8 or higher fusion with an Aluber or Comedy in our graveyard and our branded Theater in play. Suppose our opponent finds a way to destroy said level 8 or higher fusion. On destruction, we could trigger the effect of our Aluber, summoning it back onto the field to replace our destroyed fusion. Then, on the removal of Aluber, Theater will trigger to bring back a level 8 fusion from our graveyard, likely the one that our opponent previously destroyed. This eventually results in our opponent getting absolutely nowhere with breaking our board, as their attempt to remove our monsters ultimately resulted in them going right back to where they started. And this strategy only gets more powerful as you produce more fusions with Theater's effect. As our graveyard increases, so does the number of options that we can bring back with Theater's effect, eventually allowing us to turn our graveyard into a toolbox of boss monsters to out whatever board our opponent may produce. Moving on from there, we have another starter in our 3 Branded Opening. Branded Opening is a quick play spell that has you discard a card as an effect to either add or special summon a Despia monster from your deck. Furthermore, while in the graveyard, should one of your fusion monsters be destroyed by card effect, you can banish Branded Opening instead to protect your fusion monster. So when I previously said that Despia had an emergency teleport, that statement was slightly inaccurate. In fact, the deck actually has a Rhoda and an emergency teleport rolled up in one, and that makes this card so much more powerful. Thanks to the fact that you don't have to special summon a monster, Branded Opening plays around both special summon locks as well as removal, ensuring that regardless of when you activate it, you can stick a monster to make it count. Furthermore, since the effect discards as an effect, it can trigger cards like your Despia Tragedy. Finally, I can't stress this enough, never forget about Branded Opening's second effect. While your preliminary boss monsters come packing with float effects such that you won't have any incentive to protect them, your endgame boss monsters do not have such effects and sometimes have no protections whatsoever. So being able to at least protect them from removal to keep them on the field a little longer is incredibly powerful and will often be the deciding factor in those late games. Then, rounding off the spells, we have one branded in white to act as a Miracle Fusion for any of our Fallen of Albaz fusion monsters, 3 Super Polymerization as another way to fuse our opponent's field away, 1 Normal Polymerization that we can search off of our 1 Fright for Patchwork that we can search off our Edge and Chains, 3 Allure of Darkness as additional draw power but to also banish a Tragedy to trigger its search off, 1 Gold Sarcophagus to banish Tragedy from deck to trigger its search, 1 Foolish Burial as another way to trigger our Tragedy but to also dump Fallen of Albaz, 1 Terraforming as a way to search into our branded Theater, and 1 Monster Reborn for additional revival. Going into the traps, we only have 4 cards consisting of 3 Infinite Impermanents for additional negation and 1 Screams of the Branded. Speaking a bit more on Screams of the Branded, Screams can activate at any point in a turn that a fusion monster was sent to the graveyard, to revive any fusion monster in your graveyard to your field. This acts as another way to recur your fusions, but it's interesting to note that Screams can activate as long as a fusion monster was sent to the graveyard in any way, meaning that you can also meet the conditions for Scream's activation when you tribute a fusion monster for Comedy's effect, or when you fuse a fusion monster away for another fusion monster, making Screams much more flexible and abusable than just your average recovery trap. Going into the extra deck, we kick it off with our main enforcer in our 3 Despian Coritis. Despian Coritis is a level 8 light fiend fusion monster that can be made with a Despia monster and a light or dark monster. While on the field during the main phase, Coritis can set the attack of all monsters that aren't level 8 or higher fusion monsters to 0. Furthermore, should Coritis leave the field by an opponent's card effect, it can special summon or add either a Despia monster or a Fallen of Albaz from the deck. Breaking down Despia Coritis, there are a few things to look at. Firstly is its summoning requirements. Requiring a Despia monster and a light or dark monster, Coritis can be made using any 2 Despia monsters, with one of those Despia monsters counting as the dark for its summoning requirements. But the fact that it could take a light as part of its fusion material means that we can also use cards like our Effect Veiler as well as our opponent's light or dark monsters to make this card, making this card also a decent super poly target for the deck as well. Then, going into its 2 effects, the first effect is exclusive enough such that it doesn't affect any of our fusion monsters, but is expansive enough such that it would affect pretty much any other deck. This almost ensures that our opponent will not be able to run over this card, in turn guaranteeing that our opponent will try to remove it with a card effect. This in turn only triggers its second effect, which can net us several useful options. For one, we can special summon out a Fallen of Albaz directly from our deck for a super poly play. Alternatively, we can summon a Despia monster like an Aluber to trigger its search, or a Dramaturge for another big body. And let's not forget, by summoning out a Despia monster, we also put a non-fusion fairy on the field to prime our theater to revive our Coritis upon its destruction, which combined with an existing Aluber in our graveyard actually nets us 1 additional monster in the exchange to allow us to go from a recursive board to an advancing one. Going from there, we have our 2 endgame boss monsters in our 1 Despian Proskenion and our 1 the First Dark Lord. Starting with Proskenion, Despian Proskenion is a level 11 fiend fusion monster that requires a Despia monster alongside a light and a dark monster. While on the field during either player's main phase, Proskenion can target 1 fusion, synchro, exceeds, or link monster in your opponent's graveyard, and either banish it or special summon it to your side of the field. Furthermore, should Proskenion destroy a monster by battle, Proskenion can inflict damage to your opponent equal to that destroyed monster's highest stat. Moving on to the First Dark Lord, the First Dark Lord is a level 12 fairy fusion monster that requires 3 dark fairies to make. While on the field, the First Dark Lord grants targeting protection to all your fairy type monsters. Additionally, during either player's main phase, the First Dark Lord can revive 1 fairy type monster from your graveyard at the cost of 1,000 life points. So, comparing these 2 monsters, it's very clear that both cards do very different things from each other. Starting with Proskenion, Despian Proskenion is the more offensive option of the 2. Being able to deal damage relative to what Proskenion destroys is nice, but the real meat of Proskenion's power comes from its ability to essentially steal your opponent's extra deck monsters from their graveyard. The only issue with Proskenion is the fact that it requires a dark and a light monster. While it's quite easy to get a Despia monster and a dark monster for Proskenion's requirements, the Despia deck lacks an efficient way into a light monster outside of fusing for a Coritis. This unfortunately means that to make Proskenion, it can be quite costly and, given its lack of protection, can also be quite risky as well. Thus, you're more likely to be making the First Dark Lord instead. Not only is the First Dark Lord much easier to summon given his laxer requirements of only 3 Dark Fairies, of which all the Despia are, but the fact that he provides targeting protection to all your fairies works fantastically in ensuring that the on-field effects of cards like Dramaturge or Aluber resolve successfully. This is further bolstered by the First Dark Lord's effect to revive fairies from your graveyard, which can immediately repay you for the First Dark Lord's fusion summon, while also providing cards like Aluber the opportunity to trigger. This is all topped by the fact that the first Dark Lord is a whopping 4,000 attack, meaning that with his self-granted targeting protection, the first Dark Lord is a monster your opponent will have to jump through hoops and hurdles to out, lest they get snowballed out of the game. Then, rounding off the fusions, we start with the Albaz fusions consisting of one Sprin the Iron Dash Dragon and one Titanclad the Ash Dragon, as well as one Albion the Branded Dragon. The former of these two dragons are present in this deck as their summoning requirements are the most generic for Fallen of Albaz's effect. The latter is present as an option to be made using your Branded in White spell as a way to access a generic Miracle Fusion play for either your Poscanion or your first Dark Lord using monsters in your graveyard. Moving on from there, we have a series of super poly targets consisting of one Starving Venom Fusion Dragon for the Dark matchups, one Dragostapelia for the Dragoons matchup, one Mud Dragon for the Niche matchups, one Mad Golden Lord for the Outlich matchup, and one Winda for the Shadal matchup. Then rounding off the remainder of the deck, we have two links in our one Predaplant Verte Anaconda to copy either a poly or a super poly, and the one Cross Deep for potential extension. And that's going to do it for the Despia deck profile. So what are my opinions on the deck? Well, despite what I've done to sell you on this deck, the deck definitely isn't up to par with the current meta standard. For one, the deck is a little unprotected for what it's trying to accomplish. While the floating effects of the Despia are definitely powerful, they are predicated on you maintaining control of both your field spell and your fusion monsters, and the loss of either can be quite devastating for your game plan. For another, the deck lacks a meaningful level of interaction with the opponent. To date, the deck only has two forms of active disruption in the Dramaturge and in the Coritis, and while both are powerful in their own right, they definitely don't do enough to stop the current meta decks from pressing forward and breaking your board. But hopefully future support can fix that. Now before I go, I do want to commemorate this 1-year milestone for this channel. When I uploaded my first video, I had no idea there would be this many people who would appreciate the content I put out. But nearing 1,500 subscribers, I can't deny that one of the reasons I keep making content is because of you guys and the feedback you provide. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you for watching these videos. It means a lot. As always, this has been Tony, your deck architect, with another deck profile. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did making it, and I will see you guys next time.